Another day is here, and you're ready for it. What to wear? Check. Breakfast, lunch, and dinner? Check. Planning for what's next and how to save for it? That's where Bank of America can help. For your financial to-dos, Bank of America has experts ready to help get you closer to your goals. Get started at one of our local financial centers or 24/7 in our mobile banking app. Find a location near you at bankofamerica.com/talktous. What would you like the power to do? Mobile banking requires downloading the app and is only available for select devices. Message and data rates may apply. Bank of America N.A., member FDIC.
Now's the time to save 30% on wedding jewelry, only on BlueNile.com. Make sure your wedding ring is the one with your pick of diamond and lab-grown diamond bands, all hand-finished and graded for excellence. Or surprise her with something blue she'll love for life, like a stunning pair of sapphire earrings. Blue Nile's jewelry experts are available 24/7 to help, from fit questions to style advice. Right now, get up to 30% off at BlueNile.com. BlueNile.com.
When you need mealtime inspiration, it's worth shopping Kroger, where you'll find over 30,000 mouth-watering choices that excite your inner foodie. And no matter what tasty choice you make, you'll enjoy our everyday low prices, plus extra ways to save, like digital coupons worth over $600 each week. You can also save up to $1 off per gallon at the pump with fuel points. More savings and more inspiring flavors make shopping Kroger worth it every time. Kroger, fresh for everyone. Fuel restrictions apply.
Cancelo, oh, it's brilliant from Mo Salah, and still Salah, oh, sensational! Son had a go and scored a beauty.
Oh, what a strike from Yuri Tielemans! De Bruyne!
And it's what Martinelli, gorgeous! Still going up. Oh, he's done it again!
And City have won the Premier League!
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, EPL Index proudly brings to you the best prediction podcast in the world, A Tad Predictable, with your host, Tadiwa Chanakira.
And we're back. Welcome to another episode of A Tad Predictable, the post-season edition. Really good episode yesterday. I enjoyed recording that one. We were discussing Brentford and what they could do to sort of fix the malaise, the stagnation that seems to have crept into the club, in my opinion. And obviously the season to forget, I'd say, for Brentford. Last time out, they will be hoping to avoid any sort of relegation battle next time out in the Premier League. That's for sure. So definitely go check that one out if you missed it. We are obviously continuing our postseason series where we'll be discussing all of the teams that are going to be in the English Premier League in the 24-25 season. Sort of like a Cliff Notes type series. We'll be looking at how their season and, what happened in the previous season, what their goals are for the next season, and what they need to do in the transfer window in order to achieve that. So we'll be moving swiftly along to the next team in alphabetical order. Obviously, following Brentford is Brighton. But before we get to the Brighton part of the show, we're going to do what we did yesterday, and I think just going forward, what we're going to do, which is looking at some of the gossip that is going on in terms of transfers. I'll give you my thoughts on the situation as they stand, and then we will move on to Brighton, who have obviously a big thing to do in terms of bringing in the manager. That seems to be imminent. And then also now dealing with some intricate contract details that we will discuss a bit later on when it comes to one of the players that may be involved in going out of the club, who was out on loan previously this past season. He did really well on loan, and there's an interesting clause in his contract which is going to probably help Brighton out, and we'll see sort of the smarts of Tony Bloom and the team there and what they're doing. But yeah, let's look at some gossip in terms of what is happening around the league. Obviously, we've got Michael Olise, who is probably the big talking point at the moment. He seems to have agreed terms with Chelsea. Chelsea are obviously taking that next step in terms of approaching Crystal Palace and being able to try and negotiate a transfer fee for him there. Other clubs that are flirting around the situation, it seems like Newcastle and Bayern Munich have been two teams that have been talked about in terms of their sort of monitoring the situation. And of course, Man United have had long-term interest in him. I wouldn't rule out a Liverpool being interested in him. I think he could certainly fit in to their team, either him or Mo Salah playing as the 10 in the new on-slot system could be quite interesting. But yeah, from a personal perspective, and it has nothing to do with football rivalry, just has to do with enjoying football, I hope he doesn't go to Chelsea. I just think they have too many players that play in the position that he plays in. And we see it time and time again with Chelsea, where they just sign so many of these really talented young players that just get drowned in terms of squad depth in their squad, and we don't get to see them feature. I mean, obviously, there are some that break the trend, like a Cole Palmer that comes in and becomes sort of the talisman of the team. But remember Chukwuemeka? How cool was he when he was at Aston Villa and he was coming up and everyone was excited about what he could be doing? He ends up going to Chelsea. It's not quite worked out for him there. And it's, stuff like that really just annoys me, because I'm excited to see these players. I get excited about these players. I get excited for these players and the careers they could have. And sometimes they end up making decisions that I wouldn't personally recommend they make, just because they block their pathway. And obviously players are confident. You have to have a certain level of confidence in your ability to make it to this level of competitive football. So he's probably looking at the Chelsea squad, as bloated as it was, and I'm talking about Khan and Chukwuemeka here, and saying, well, I'm good enough, I'm going to make the team, I'm going to be starting for them. I certainly don't think he came there with the intentions of being on the bench or not being in a matchday squad at some points in time. It will be the same with Elise if he goes to Chelsea. He'll be going with the intent to start. And as I say, there's just a whole lot of right-wingers that Chelsea have. I don't know how it's all going to work out. But as I said, it's one of those where he seems to have sorted out the contract side of things from his perspective. It's now whether Chelsea can sort out the transfer fee side, and or if another club steps in the meantime. And then we're looking at other rumours. Obviously, we spoke about De Ligt the other day, and the fact that he's sort of being shopped out by Bayern Munich, Man United being one of those clubs that is closely monitoring that situation. I think it's between him and Tadiwa in terms of who Man United sign as a centre-back. If I was a Man United fan, I'd probably prefer Tadiwa, just because De Ligt, the injuries are a bit of a concern, and I think he's it's almost like he's bought into the hype. He reminds me of those players that feel like they've already made it before they've made it, and they never actually reach that potential. So from a United perspective, I'll be looking at Tadiwa. Obviously, Man United would have connections there, so probably going to get a decent deal done for that one. In terms of other news, there's obviously Lenny Yoro in terms of hot young centre-backs. So again, another one maybe that Man United might be looking at. But I know Liverpool are really, really interested in him. And I would guess it's between Liverpool and Real Madrid in terms of who can get him. I think Real Madrid wanted Yoro to stay another year in France and then come next year. I don't know if he's going to be patient enough for that. So we will see whether or not that happens. And then obviously in our Aston Villa podcast, I discussed Tammy Abraham being a potential replacement for Ollie Watkins if they end up selling Ollie Watkins. I guess even if they end up selling Duran, because it seems like Aston Villa, who want about 40 million for Duran, are in talks with Chelsea about whether or not Chelsea can land the 20-year-old Colombian. But yeah, Tammy Abraham, he's getting interest from Tottenham. He's getting interest from Aston Villa. I call that one. And he's getting interest from West Ham as well. So a guy that hopefully comes back to the Premier League, hopefully can revive his career in England and maybe get back in contention for those England spots in the future. We will see with him. But yeah, I think that's sort of the big rumors that are circulating at the moment. Some of the other ones, the Ivan Toney stuff, it's not really moving forward that much. In terms of Brighton, obviously, this one's closer to home for Brighton in that De Zerbi looks like he's close to joining Marseille. Obviously, Brighton will be expecting a transfer fee for that one. It's rumored to be around 5 million that you need to pay Brighton in order to be able to secure Roberto De Zerbi, which to me it's a weird one. When he left Brighton, the sort of impression that was given was that he was leaving to go to a higher profile job, or he had probably been promised another job. It didn't seem like a situation where him and the club completely fell apart and could not work together going forward. Yes, he wasn't necessarily happy with some of the situations. I know, for example, the Dewsbury Hall situation where they didn't end up getting him in the previous January window, and Dewsbury Hall will be one of those players we discuss a bit later on in the podcast. But I don't think it was so badly ruined, sort of the working relationship, that he had to leave. Certainly that was the impression that I got, that he had to leave, that he could have just stayed at Brighton. Obviously, maybe not the best outcome in terms of what they did last season and then what they did this season in the league. Still decent, but you know what I mean? Like, I think he could have been given another year just to see if he could elevate them a bit more. But yeah, he ends up going, and he ends up at Marseille. I'm a bit underwhelmed by that, in my opinion. I thought he was going to get a bigger job than Marseille. Maybe he was on the shortlist for some jobs. Maybe he got promised a job and then it ended up not coming available or something like that. That will be probably one for his book, autobiography, if he ever writes one. But yeah, I'm disappointed in the fact that he's leaving Brighton and ending up at Marseille. No disrespect to Marseille itself. I just assumed it was going to be a bigger club than that. So it's more a me. It's me, it's not you situation to Marseille. It has nothing to do with you. It has more to do with maybe the expectations I had put on where he was going to land after the previous season. But that leads us perfectly on to the team that we will be discussing today, and it is Brighton Hove Albion. Had a mixed season in that obviously they had the excitement of being in Europa League. They looked like they were going well in there and then sort of came unstuck in the round of 16, unfortunately for them. You look at their group stages, they topped the group. I think they lost one game, played 6, won 4, drew 1, and lost 1 game. So, yeah, and funny enough, Marseille were in their group. So, I don't know, maybe there were talks that were had when Brighton were over in France for the away leg. Who knows? In terms of the knockout stages, I mean, the Europa League, we all know it's a long, lengthy tournament. But they had that round of 16 draw. It ends up being Roma. You're thinking maybe, Roma aren't necessarily doing super well at the moment. Maybe we can sneak past them. But away from home in Italy, they end up losing 4-0, and the tie is pretty much over after that. So maybe some inexperience from either the manager and or the players in terms of how to approach a game, European game away from home. 4-0, maybe try and, even play for the draw or something, and or keep the score as low as possible and try and bring them to your home ground. You'll have the fans, and you can try and win it that way. But it seemed like poor game management, I can say, match planning. Yes, you want to play your style of football. Yes, I appreciate that. But in Europe, sometimes you have to be a little bit more conservative away from home, knowing that you can come back home and do the job there. So maybe some learning lessons for some of the players and for the manager as well. They ended up winning the home leg 1-0, but I mean, it was 4-0 on aggregate. I mean, it was 4-1 in the end of aggregate. It was academic. It was academic that they were going out. So yeah, they'll be disappointed with the way they went out. But again, solid performance in the group stages, looked really strong, looked really good. And yeah, it ended up not going so well for them. A tough draw. An easy draw, maybe they could have gone a little bit further in that competition. We look also then at the Carabao Cup. It was one and done for them in that one. They again had a brutal draw. They end up playing Chelsea away from home. I mean, come on, guys. It's unfortunate for them that the draw was not kind to them in any of the cup tournaments, I thought, this season. Yeah, 1-0 loss to Chelsea. I mean, well, what are you going to do? It's Chelsea. At that stage of the competition, you're probably playing some of your more reserve players, and Chelsea just have a massive squad, as I was alluding to earlier with the Carney Chukwuemeka stuff. Unfortunately for them. Then they had, obviously, the FA Cup, which is the last tournament you sort of enter, if you look at it from a calendar perspective. Finally, they get a good draw, Stoke, but it's Stoke away. But anyway, you know, can you do it on a rainy night in Stoke on a Sunday? But it's fine. 4-2 win, looking good. All right, they move on to the fourth round. They're feeling good. They draw Sheffield United away from home. Obviously, Sheffield United, a Premier League team at the time, but a struggling Premier League team at the time. And Brighton obviously took advantage of that, winning that game 5-2. On the 27th of January. It then moves to February the 28th, where they're drawn against another Premier League team. Again, guys, come on. Can they catch a break with these draws that they're getting? End up drawing Wolves away from home. So all of their games in the FA Cup were away from home. The Carabao Cup game was away from home. And obviously we saw they didn't perform too well away in Italy for that Europa League game. So yeah, really, really tough situation. They end up losing 1-0 to Wolves in that game, and that is them done in terms of cup competitions for the season. Then turns their attention back to the Premier League and looking at, obviously, you had the FA Cup game on the 28th of February. The 7th of March was when they had the Roma game away. So maybe some of the players was already starting to, you know, get one eye on the European game, and maybe that's what made them slip up against Wolves in that game in the FA Cup. But again, if you're in all these tournaments, these things start to factor in: squad depth, fatigue, player concentration levels, player, sort of adrenaline, focusing on another game opposed to, you know, the game in front of them. These are all factors that you have to manage as a squad, as a player, and of course as a manager and his staff. So in the league, we're looking at what they did there. I mean, look, it ends up being 11th place. For a while this season, they were sort of being touted as being a very disappointing season in the league, that is. And I think they started well. I think they lost only 2 games in their first 7, if I'm not mistaken. And then the malaise sort of started to kick in. And that's sort of around the time when European football starts coming in. So, you know, your eye starts getting turned. And in and around there, you start seeing a lot of draws, a lot of losses. You end up getting, I think it was from game week 7 until only at game week 19 when they got their 3rd win. So that's a lot of games where they were drawing and losing and drawing and losing. And maybe the writing was already on the wall from back then for De Zerbi and Brighton in terms of the relationship, if that is the case. So a tough season in the league, understandable considering they had the European football, and I'm sure a lot of the focus would have been on that and trying to do well there, and potential financial implications from a positive perspective that could have derived from doing really, really well in that tournament. But alas, it didn't go too well for them in that tournament. It didn't go too well for them in the league. But they sort of, towards the end of the season, turned it around in the sense that they ended up finishing in 11th place. I mean, look, when I'm looking at the league, I'm looking at, you know, some of the teams that were in and around that situation: the West Hams, the Crystal Palaces, the Brightons, the Bournemouths, the Fulhams. All of those teams were sort of they weren't in danger of getting relegated, but they all at different stages of the season for different reasons really had very poor form, very patchy form, which led obviously to the position that they ended up in. So yeah, in terms of last season, I think it's one where Brighton can hopefully take the experience from last season and move forward. Unfortunately for them, they won't have the European football to then kind of capitalize on that learning that they had last season. But hopefully the players will be rejuvenated and re-energized to try and go and do it again, try and get back into Europe. And maybe some of the new players that they bring in will also help elevate that hunger level for them. So yeah, I think for them, the important thing is getting back to good Premier League performances, getting back to a consistent run of form. I can't remember. I mean, after that good early run where they sort of lost 2 games in their first 7 games of the season, I don't think they had back-to-back victories in the rest of the season. And that's got to be something that needs to be fixed. And it can only be fixed with the new manager coming in, because De Zerbi's not going to be there to fix it. As I said, he's on the verge of joining Marseille. Brighton, from their perspective, are on the verge of bringing in their new manager. It's going to be imminent. It seems like they've sort of narrowed down the shortlist to one now, and they're going to be finalizing that deal soon. So it makes it a bit difficult in terms of like transfers and all of that stuff. I mean, how much work has been done already in the background getting ready for this transfer window, or is it going to be a very reactionary transfer window? I'm confident, considering it's Brighton, that it will be a sense of we've already identified the targets and the profile of players that we want to sign. Maybe it's a short list of 5 in each position, or however many that list is. And it's now bringing a manager that can work within those parameters, rather than we've seen with other clubs where the manager comes in and they dictate the list. They dictate who they want to bring in. No, I think with Brighton, it's a very system club in that the off the pitch structure and system is so ingrained in what they do there that as a manager, you're coming in effectively as a coach, and you're coming in to blend with what's being done off the pitch, from the recruitment side of things, the data side of things, financial side of things. You're coming to blend in and help elevate the players that they bring in, help develop the players that they bring in. You're not coming to dictate who is coming in. You might get to give your opinions on the shortlists that are given, and or the identity of player you want to bring in. But I don't think you can go in and say I want X, Y, and Z in terms of a specific player name. So that's going to be what will obviously be the big task for Fabian Hurzeler. He comes in. As I say, it looks potentially like he's coming in, but it seems like he's on the verge of coming in. 31 years of age, going to be the youngest manager in the Premier League. I mean, he's part of the batch of these Premier League or just world managers who, at a very early point in their playing careers, sort of veered to one side and decided, maybe I'm not going to have that career that I would have wanted, or I'm not going to have longevity. I mean, he was mostly in sort of the lower divisions of German football. So straight away, he moves into management, and he ends up obviously now at Brighton at the age of 21 years old. I mean, it's a really, really cool story. We've seen it with the likes of Will Stills, where these young managers are starting to creep through. And hopefully McKenna is another one that is doing good things in England at the moment. So we will see how he does. In terms of playing style, because obviously, as I was saying, you kind of need to bleed into what Brighton do if you're a manager coming in. Similarities can be pointed out with De Zerbi specifically in terms of tempo of play, and how he likes to lull defenses into false senses of security by slowing play down and then boom, all of a sudden they start doing quick passes and they expose, those sort of gaps that have been left. So he likes centre-backs that are very comfortable on the ball, one of which usually steps a bit further up into sort of almost midfield to try and create that overlap in terms of, or outnumber the other team in those central areas. He needs those fullbacks to be stretching play. I should probably mention it's a 3-4-3 system, but it's not a very rigid 3-4-3 that he likes to play. But yeah, so you'll have the wing backs, you'll have the 3 centre backs. All of them need to be good on the ball, with one in particular that's going to be stepping into sort of that midfield position in an effort to sort of circulate the ball and drive things from that perspective. And then you've got those wing backs that are going to give width, they're going to giving support going forward. And then in midfield, it's quite interesting because both the central midfielders do go forward as well. It's not like one sits in front of the back 3. Yes, there is that element to it, but because they're such a high-pressing team when it comes to losing the ball and transition football, they're afforded to go a bit further because the pressure is going to, as soon as they lose the ball, you're going to have to pressure, the person that loses the ball, the person closest to where the ball is recovered by the other team, they press. The rest of the people close in and around sort of block passing lanes, and that gives then players behind them enough time to sort of get back into a decent shape, and then it will become a bit more structured. So it's a bit fluid between the flexible system and the structured system, which is that new wave we're starting to see. That's when these inverted fullbacks started coming in, is can we be fluid and then morph into that more structured system and vice versa throughout the game? It makes it a lot harder for the other team to know who to pick up and what positions they need to be in, and that seems to be where football's moving, where everyone needs to almost be able to play in almost any position because you need to fill a hole, and some managers have taken that to the extreme where literally the goalkeeper is the one that stays in their position. Everyone else needs to be able to fill the position that's necessary to be filled. And then, once we're in a comfortable shape, you can always then go back to your natural position. And then, obviously, as I said, they're spectrums in terms of that fluidity towards the more rigid systems where you don't move from sort of set positions and allocations within the pitch. So yeah, so it's that 3-4-3. I've mentioned the midfielders, they're almost box-to-box type because they're going to be going forward to help an attack, and they're going to have to come back defensively, making sure that they're cutting the passing lanes, usually when it comes to the pressing once in transition when they lose the ball. Obviously, then got that forward up front. They almost play, like sort of like a deep line forward is what he played at St. Paul this past season. So I'm assuming it will be the same situation for the likes of Ferguson. They're going to have to adapt to that style of football. And then you got the wingers that are very comfortable being one-on-one with defenders, looking to exploit spaces that have been left by sort of weaknesses in defensive systems, by that lulling them into sleep. And then all of a sudden you've got, the wingers moving into spaces where they're isolating players one-on-one, driving at them and looking to fashion chances. So it's a very fluid, exciting style of football. As I said, you can see the similarities with De Zerbi, the slow, quick, slow type football in there. So there are elements of that. You've got the high pressing, which is obviously the element of the Nagelsmanns and the Jurgen Klopps. Probably why he's earned, the nickname of the next Julian Nagelsmann in Germany. So you've got elements of that with the pressing as well, and then obviously Nagelsmann with the system as well slightly. So yeah, he looks like he's going to be an exciting manager. He looks like he fits into the mold of what Brighton do. Brighton always have had centre-backs that are relatively comfortable on the ball. Obviously, some of them are getting on in age. That might be a factor. Brighton have always had really adventurous fullbacks or wingbacks that bomb forward, so that's going to be the same. Brighton have always had, and I'm talking about this new Tony Bloom iteration of Brighton, that is, obviously. Brighton have always had those wide players that are comfortable dribbling and taking players on one-on-one. Matoma, obviously, I mean, the student of dribbling, if I can say, is the perfect example of that. So that's going to be similar for him. Maybe the forward, it might be a little bit different because they're going to have to drop deep a bit to create that space for the wingers to get mismatches and stuff like that. So maybe a bit more of a learning curve for the likes of Ferguson, Pedro, Welbeck as well, who signed a new contract recently. But yeah, so that seems to be what he's going to be bringing into the team. And then obviously from an experience level, I mentioned he was at St. Paul's in Bundesliga 2. They end up getting promoted. He got the job there, if I'm not mistaken, sort of as an interim manager after the manager got fired back in December 2022. And then he sort of went on a run of games whilst he was interim manager, and that, went really well. And they end up just saying, okay, you got the job, well done. We don't need to then, let's make this interim thing permanent. And then obviously he went on to get his pro license back in April 2023. And obviously we know what happened last season, leads the team through Bundesliga 2 promotion to the Bundesliga main, and obviously now gets this interesting job at Brighton, where he'll have similar situation in that won't have the big budget. In Bundesliga 2, he certainly didn't have the biggest budget there. He had to develop a lot of the players that he had, and then, looking to be smarter than the other team, beating them on the tactical side of things. That's going to be similar in the Premier League. He's got to have to really be smart from a tactical perspective against some of these teams, because some of the teams, they just outmatch you in terms of quality of players. But yeah, he looks like an exciting manager. It looks like an exciting hire for Brighton, and we'll see whether or not he's going to be able to make it a successful situation. And I know we spent a bit of time talking about him, but I wanted you guys to get an idea of what he's going to be bringing. Maybe you were starting to think of some players that they could be bringing in, or players in their squad that would fit certain roles. I've already been mentioning some of them throughout. But yeah, so it's that, with that 3-4-3 in mind, I'll let you guys mull that over as we go to a quick ad break. But before we do that, obviously, guys, go and check out Liberty Shield. This podcast is presented by EPLindex.com in association with Liberty Shield. Liberty Shield is a virtual private network which can be installed on multiple devices, whether you're traveling and you don't want to get locked out of your bank account, you want to stay safe whilst using your public Wi-Fi, or you want to unlock geo-locked content, then Liberty Shield is a place for you. Or, you just want to protect your online, you just want to protect your data. Liberty Shield is the product for you guys. If you go to their website and use the coupon code EPL25, you'll get 25% off of your router or the software VPN. And obviously the software VPN downloads straight onto your devices. Let's mull over what they could be doing heading into next season. We'll discuss sales, and then we'll discuss incomings after this short break. All right, we are back discussing Brighton. We're looking ahead now. We've discussed what happened last season. We've discussed the new manager coming in, the style of play that he's going to have. Now let's look at some of the players that maybe either from a contractual perspective, their contracts are running out and we need to sell them because we don't believe in letting players go out on free transfers on this podcast. Obviously, there are some that slip through the net here. Adam Lallana goes out. He leaves, obviously, as I mentioned, on that free transfer. Maybe he ends up back at Southampton. And then, that would be quite interesting if he does end up going to Southampton. In terms of players that are going to be leaving as well, along with Adam Lallana, we are looking at young player, Mark Leonard, he obviously was out on loan last season. He is garnering interest from the likes of Oxford. I know Birmingham City have been interested in him, as well as Wrexham. The fee that's been talked about is about £450,000 in order to get him. And it looks like Oxford are leading the race for him at the moment. So we've gone ahead and given him to Oxford for that 400,000. Another player that is going to be leaving Brighton, we feel, is Mahmoud Dahoud. Now, unfortunately for him, it's just not worked out for him at Brighton. He obviously had that loan spell at Stuttgart this past January. He went there in January, but it seems unlikely that Stuttgart are going to make that loan deal permanent. They obviously had an opportunity to make it permanent for about 8.5 million, but based on reports, it seems like he's not going to be someone that they end up signing. Obviously, Stuttgart, big season for them last season. They've got Champions League football. They came second in Bundesliga last season. Yes, Bayern not only didn't win it, they didn't even come second. That was the malaise that Bayern had in the league last season. But yeah, so Mahmoud Dahoud, he needs to go. I don't think another loan is good enough. From our perspective, we were looking to sell him again with those contracts in mind. Yes, he's got a couple of years left in his contract, but it seems quite obvious that he's not going to work out at Brighton, so we would send him away with well wishes. He's probably going to end up in Germany. For this podcast, we've sent him over to Hoffenheim for that 8.5 million. And the reason we sent him for the 8.5 million is because the loan that Stuttgart had for him had that option to buy for 8.5, but the option to buy is not exclusive to Stuttgart. So any team could have come up with that 8.5, and I guess Stuttgart would need to match it, and then he would then decide where he wants to go. So it was one of those options to buy that's not exclusive to that specific club. That's very important because we're going to speak about something else a bit later on in terms of options to buy as well. Another interesting one. But yeah, so he ends up going to Hoffenheim. We wish him well. Another player who, even last season, he admitted he still needed time to learn the De Zerbi system, but obviously De Zerbi is going. But again, it's a manager coming in with a similar profile in terms of playing styles. Yes, there differences and intricacies to the different systems, but more or less it's going to be the same. So Jakob Moder, we're going to have to send him out, and we seem to be enjoying selling to the German clubs. They've been very good to us in this transfer window, spoiler alert. He goes to Eintracht Frankfurt for 8.25 million. Another player who, as I said, he hasn't quite settled down into a mainstay position at Brighton, and Brighton just have a lot of really young, exciting players that we don't want him to be blocking their passageway. Speaking of, I spoke about Chelsea earlier and them blocking certain players' progression and career progress. We don't want that at Brighton. So unfortunately for him, he's going to have to go because we've got the likes of Jack Hinchelwood, who really is impressing. He's got a brand new contract at Brighton a couple of months ago. So you don't want to block those type of players' progression. And he, obviously, if it wasn't for the injury last season, he would have gotten a lot more minutes last season. And I think Brighton have admitted that as much. I think De Zerbi was talking about how much he missed him in and around the team quite late into the season, and was talking about how they were looking forward to having him back next season. So I think he's one that is highly rated within the inner circles of Brighton. So again, sorry, Jakob Moder, you're going to have to go just to facilitate the amount of midfielders we do end up having. And then I'm going to talk about Abdallah Sima first, and then we'll get on to Deniz Undav. So Sima, he went on loan to Rangers. They had an option to buy for him. It seems like they don't have the money to do that option to buy or to, I guess, to activate that option to buy at the moment. But he's got a year left on his contract. He was really happy at Rangers, he spoke about, I think he did an interview with some Rangers press where he was talking about how his family has settled really well in Scotland and with Rangers, and he was enjoying his time there, and he was really hoping he would have a chance to go back there and obviously play for Rangers. Now, Rangers will probably try to get another loan deal, but as I said, with his contract coming up, Brighton don't want that situation where it's a loan and then he ends up going there for free in the end. Brighton want a fee. So the way I've worked it in this one is trying to put the hat of a Tony Bloom on and saying, look, we know that Rangers don't necessarily have the money in order to sign him, and we're talking relatively, I think 4, 5 million, 6 million is probably what you could get Seema for. I know, for example, in terms of valuations, he's valued around the 500 million mark in terms of just general valuations in and around football. But yeah, so it seems like Rangers won't be able to get to that. So what I've done, as I said, we know Brighton are very smart when it comes to the transfer market. We've given him to Rangers for 4 million. Okay. Fine, you can pay it for 4 million. You can have him for 4 million. But we've put on a very, very hefty sell-on clause. So we will get a percentage of whatever money that Rangers get for if they end up selling him in the future. And I think that's sort of just because for Brighton, yes, I know all things relative. Before I say this, let me caveat it by saying all things relative. But 1 to 2 million isn't money. It isn't a lot of money in the grand scheme of things for Brighton in terms of stopping this deal from happening. And again, I reiterate, all things relative. I'm not saying that 1 million or 2 million isn't a lot of money. I just mean for what Brighton are trying to do, it's smarter to let him go for slightly less than we would have wanted. He's got the 1 year left on his contract. We get some money in for him and we secure financial incoming in the future if Rangers do end up selling him. He's still a young player. Let's say he does well at Rangers and another club wants to go and buy him. We then benefit from that as well. 23 years of age he will be. So yeah, I think that's the smart way to do it, and that's the only way I can see Rangers being able to sign him is getting some sort of giving up some sort of sell-on clause to Brighton in order to help lower the price a bit for him. Now, the last player that will be leaving, we're going to speak about is Dennis Undav, and the reason I've left him for last, and I was sort of teasing in terms of interesting transfer situations that have been happening in and around with Brighton is, so Undav went on loan to Stuttgart. He did really, really well there. He ended up getting 19 goals and 10 assists. It obviously helped Stuttgart get into the Champions League. I mentioned they finished second last season. There is an option to buy in his contract. Okay, option to buy is it works out at about 16.5 million pounds in order for him to be bought by Stuttgart. But within the contract, so Stuttgart could activate that, and by all accounts, he's happy at Stuttgart and would want to stay there. Stuttgart are happy with him and they would want him to stay. But Brighton also have a clause in that contract where they can re-sign Undav for about the same money that Stuttgart are buying him for. I think it's a little bit more than than the 16 and a half that Stuttgart can buy him for in the contract, but only a little bit more. And effectively, that blocks Stuttgart from being able to sign him, because if they sign him, Brighton could just turn around and then sign him back for that amount, basically the same amount of money. And the genius in that is because he's done so well with Stuttgart in the Bundesliga, because they've been heralded as a very successful season, and he was a huge part of that. he's got a lot of interest in a lot of clubs around Europe, and Brighton could probably get a lot more money than 16.5 million for him if they were to sell him. Let's say there wasn't an option to buy and he was going straight back to Brighton. They could probably be asking for closer to 30 million for him, and many clubs would probably end up paying that. Yes, it might be heavily incentivized in terms of installments and add-ons, but they could probably stretch it to that 30 million mark, whereas opposed to now, it's almost half of that is what he could go to Stuttgart for. So discussions are ongoing with Brighton at the moment and Stuttgart of how they can get this deal done. Do Stuttgart end up having to pay a bit more, even though they've got that 16.5 million option to buy? Again, maybe it's another one of those salon clause situations that Brighton like to do. It's one that's going to be interesting to watch. But because he's done so well at Stuttgart, because he really loves it there, and I think from a strategic standpoint, it would be smart for Brighton to just keep that relationship with Stuttgart. They seem to be a club doing really good things. Give them that. Okay, you can sign him for that option. Obviously, we'll negotiate in terms of percentage of salon clause, but write in some sort of, first right of refusal on some of the star players for Stuttgart, something like that, or maybe down the road, we can get a discount on a player. I think that could be a long-term strategy that Brighton could employ, but again, they've got that option of blocking the sale, blocking that transfer, and being able to get a lot more money for him than what the value of that release, it's not a release clause, option to purchase option is. So yeah, I thought that was an interesting one to just bring to you guys' attention. Now, so we sold quite a few players. We need to bring in some players to fill in. First of all, fill in squad depth in terms of players we've lost, but then also fill in some roles that we thought were important to fill at Brighton based on the new manager coming in, the system that they're going to be playing. Now, first and foremost, a centre-back has to come in. It's imperative that Brighton bring in a new centre-back. One, because of the age profile of some of the centre-backs that they do have, the Lewis Dunks of the world are starting to get older. This style of system is going to demand a lot more from them. I think in terms of, obviously, ball possession, and also in terms of chasing the ball. The older you get, the harder it's going to be to have a quick turnaround and chase the balls in behind and stuff like that. So it's definitely it's a position that Brighton need to slowly bring the average age down. And in order to do that, we've gone and signed obviously a ex-Barcelona player who obviously it didn't work out for him at Barcelona. It's Oscar Mingueza. He was at Celta Vigo. He went there on a free after he got released by Barcelona back in the day. I think it was 2022 season when he ended up joining Celta Vigo. Again, probably with a bruised ego, having failed to meet the grade at Barcelona. But to his credit, he's done really well at Celta Vigo. Again, comfortable on the ball. I think he could be a really good player for Brighton. I think he can do well in the back three. Put him in there. Maybe you want to put him at the heart of the defense and let him be the one that steps out, because he does like to play on that front foot. So in the system that they will be playing in, one of the centre-backs is going to need to step forward to try and help out the midfield at times, whether that's from a defensive or from an offensive perspective. I think Oscar could be someone that could fill that role. So we've gone ahead and signed him. And I think he's going to do a fantastic job for Brighton there. In terms of how much he's going to cost, we thought about 11.5. Again, Celta Vigo got him for free. There is rumours that Barcelona are keeping tabs on him but aren't willing to pay a transfer fee for him. Maybe if his contract runs out. And Barca like to do this. They like to hint these things to players so that players are aware of it, that, look, if I let my contract run out, Barca might come back in for me. So yeah, they've sort of hinted to him that if he does let his contract run out, they might come back in for him. But again, he had a couple of years left on his contract, so it would be a while before he would be able to don that Barcelona shirt once again. So I think Brighton can sneak ahead in here, get him now, and then if he develops, look to sell him because he's going to be a relatively cheaper option at centre-back and someone that could develop, someone that has slowly been developing more and more at Celta Vigo, and Brighton, I'm sure, will be hoping to continue that development. And then another position that we thought needed attention is the right wing-back situation. Now, you can look at it two ways. You could either be okay with Lamptey and Solly Marsh deputizing there, and you know, James Milner sometimes deputizes there. And again, one of those players that has signed a new contract extension, James Milner, he signed one. Obviously, as I mentioned, Welbeck signed one. They could get by maybe with those three, rotating Milner, Lamptey, Solly Marsh. But I think it's time for Brighton to bring in a new right wing back, full back, however you want to describe it. And we've gone and signed a very exciting Irish fullback. He's got Nigerian heritage and he's Irish as well. Festi Ebosele. He comes in from Udinese. Now, interestingly enough, he was at Derby County. Derby obviously dropped the ball on that one. They dropped the bag because they let him go. He ends up going to Udinese. He does really well there. He's now going to be garnering attention. And it's a name you guys should look out for throughout this transfer window, because if he doesn't end up at Brighton, he's ending up somewhere. I know Tottenham, for example, kicked the tires on him a couple of transfer windows ago. I know West Ham have been interested in him before in the past. But yeah, I think Brighton can go and get him. It's an area of need. He's young enough where you can still have the Solly Marshes, the James Milners that can play there when you need the experience. But he then gets to grow and make that position his own. Again, Tarek Lamptey is there as well. But I think that would be a really exciting signing. I think the fullbacks need to be exciting for this Brighton team. They need to provide width and pace, and he brings that in abundance. He's ridiculously fast. And I think he would be so much fun playing up and down that right-hand side, bring his pace in behind, overlapping one of their wide players, whether you want a Dingra starting there. Could you imagine how much you'll be able to isolate a player like a Dingra, a one-on-one with their marker, knowing that they can't double up on him because there's this fast guy coming from the back that could destroy you if you don't watch out for him. So I think he's going to be able to create a lot of space for other people just with his pace and his movement. And if they can work on that, and again, working with the tempo of the game, I think he's a perfect signing for them in terms of a young fullback coming in. So we brought him in. He's not going to cost a lot either. We've been very, very shrewd with our signings and identifying players that aren't going to cost too much money, but have good resale value, which seems to be the ethos of Brighton and Hove Albion. He's going to come in for about £12.75 million. That is a publicly quoted figure that teams have been quoted that have inquired about him. 12.75 million. It's 15 million euros is what people have been quoted that have inquired about him. So, you know what? We as Brighton, we've gone and paid that exact amount of money. He comes in, really excited about him. So we've got sort of the defense starting to take shape. We've got Mingueza coming in. We've got Ebosele coming in. And then we also need to address the midfield situation. Now, in terms of where you take the direction of the midfield, there are different ways to go about it. So if you guys look out for the tweet after this podcast comes out, we will tweet a thread that has sort of the transfer short list of some of the midfielders that didn't quite maybe get mentioned on this podcast. We also got some centre-backs in there. interesting one. Maybe I'll just mention him that was initially on the shortlist, but unfortunately wasn't on the shortlist anymore for centre back. One that we probably would have been really keen to get in was Mokhtar Diakabi from Valencia. He ended up having that really gruesome injury, unfortunately for him, towards the end of the season, and there were fears that he might not be able to walk again, let alone play again. So sending best wishes to him. Hopefully he has a full recovery and is hopefully able to go play football, the game that he loves to play, and obviously the game he makes a living off of. So he obviously had to come off of the list in terms of players that we would be looking at. But yeah, I thought it was good to give him a mention. We're sending him well wishes. Bela Kotchap was another one who, obviously a Southampton player, went out on loan to PSV Eindhoven, didn't really do well there. Maybe he could rejuvenate his career at Brighton. It could be quite a low risk, in my opinion. I think Brighton could lowball that one and get him in and sort of rejuvenate his career, give him a new breath of life. So he's on the shortlist. But in terms of midfielders, now with the fact that the midfielders are going to have to go forwards and backwards, we need to take that into account. I think obviously the likes of Pascal Gross are going to be in there. Billy Gilmore's going to be there. Baleba is obviously, young Carlos Baleba is going to be a factor in terms of squad depth in there. But I think bringing in another competitive starter to join that midfield is key for Brighton in this off-season. And in terms of players that we were looking at, we had, it depends, do we want to go more of the attacking side of things? And then you've got guys like Martin Baturina, the young Croatian kid that I really, really like. I know Arsenal have been linked with him in the past, but I think Brighton could sneak in and get him because Arsenal might have, bigger aspirations than him. He's a ridiculously talented kid, and if Arsenal was smart, they'll just bring him on board anyway, maybe loan him out for a couple of seasons. But he's got a valuation of 17 million. Again, one of those where it's been publicly quoted, 17 million you can get him for. Really sort of in the mold of Luka Modric is what people have been comping him to. Again, quite a slight player in terms of stature, like a Modric. I think he's 5'8", but really technically gifted, really attack-minded, likes to drive forward, really good off-the-ball movement. I think he could be an interesting signing for Brighton in terms of future resale value. You bring him in for that 17 million, I guarantee you're going to be selling him in a couple of seasons for at least 40, 50 million. He's that kind of talent. So if they can bring someone in like him, that would be quite cool. I've also got on the shortlist guys like Matt O'Reilly at Celtic, the Danish kid who's done really well there. I've got Andre, the Brazilian midfielder, that very aggressive box-to-box midfielder with a defensive mind as well. He seems to be flirting with a move to the Premier League. He's been, there were rumours that he had agreed to join Liverpool at one point. There were rumours he's agreed to join Fulham at some point. Those Fulham rumours are still going on to this day. He needs to get here to the Premier League. So maybe Brighton can facilitate that if Fulham aren't able to. But we will discuss him a bit further in the Fulham podcast. But yeah, so he's on the short list as well in terms of players that they could look to bring in. But the player that they will be bringing in is a player that they tried to sign in January. It's going to be a player that I really, really like. I think he was well and above the best player in the Championship last season. He looked levels ahead of everyone there. He is not a Championship player. He's a Premier League player, and he could become even more in terms of just being a player. He could become a star in the Premier League if he continues to develop. It's none other than Kieran Dewsbury-Hall. The double barrel names, they're going to be ballers. But yeah, Dewsbury-Hall, Brighton tried to sign him in January, quite late on. Leicester wanted more than 30 million. Brighton were not looking to pay that much for him. They thought we could get him for a little bit, a lot less than that. The problem for Leicester is I think Brighton can go back in, and I think Brighton can sort of just hold on a low ball offer. I think Brighton, if they go in max 27 million and they say, here's 27 million, take it or leave it. We know Leicester have issues when it comes to profit and sustainability. They have to sell players before July the 1st. And one of the most profitable players would be Dewsbury Hall because he's an academy player. So they don't have, obviously, that huge transfer fee that they would have to shave off from having bought him. It's all going to be profit pretty much. I think Brighton are going to go back in. I think Tony Bloom's going to get one over on them finally to say, you didn't want to sell him in January. Well, you have to sell him to us now because the clock is ticking. So that's one to keep an eye on. I think he would be fantastic in this new system for Brighton. And I think he could be sort of the talisman in that midfield that they base their entire midfield around. I would love to see Fabian Hurzeler developing a Dewsbury Hall and see what he can get out of him. But yeah, so that's what we've done. We've got Dewsbury Hall in. We've got Ebosele coming in. We've got Mingueza coming in. In terms of deals that we've done for this podcast, those are the ones we've done. We also flirted with the potential of bringing in another forward, but obviously then Danny Welbeck signed that contract extension, and it wasn't even a 1-year contract extension, it was a 2-year contract extension. So I don't think we need to go into any additional forwards that they need to sign in. But guys, if you guys feel that there are other forwards that they need to bring in, have a look at the tweet, as I mentioned, that we will post when this podcast comes out. It has the breakdown, so you can see obviously the tactical shape that we've given the team. This is how Fabian's team plays. So we've got the shape there, we've got the squad there, we've got transfers in, transfers out. We'll post some of the targeted transfer shortlist on there as well. You guys let us know if there's anything else you would do differently. If there were some players you thought maybe Brighton should be getting, do let us know on there. But guys, that is going to do it for another episode of A Tad Predictable. Go and check out, in terms of plugs, go and check out the Two Footer podcast that runs daily with Dave Hendrick. He will be discussing all of the news in and around the Premier League. Go and look at the EPL Index website. It has everything that you need, especially when it comes to Euros. Euros will be kicking off. Super excited to be watching those. Obviously, best wishes to England in the Euros. Hopefully they go and bring that trophy home. Hopefully football is coming home for England. Also, guys, go and check out on Twitter, obviously the Twitter account, that you will get to see this the breakdown from a visual perspective. It's at A Tad Predictable on Twitter. I will always call it Twitter, even if it changes its name again. Go and follow at EPL Index on Twitter. Go and follow, go and subscribe to the EPL Index channel on your podcast providers. Give us 5 stars, write positive comments. That stuff really goes a long way and it helps us out. And we do appreciate all the positive love that you guys send us. I've been Tadiwa Chanakira. You can find me on the Twitter handle at TadPredict. So huge thank you to Obi Semenya. He's at John Empire SA, and Jody, she's at Spursy141 for our guest intros. Our producer behind the glass, Mr. Guy Drinkle. He's at Guy Drinkle on Twitter. From the team, from Guy, and from me, we'll see you next time. And remember, Chisinga Perry, Chinoshura.
What a strike from Yuri Tielemans. De Bruyne! And this one from Martinelli, gorgeous. Still going up. Oh, he's done it again. And City have won the Premier League.
Sports Social Podcast Network.